You're watching Roundtable. Russia's actions in Ukraine are already spreading fear that it wants to extend control across Eastern Europe. Now the country appears to be setting its sights on Africa, in what some NATO members are calling a worrying threat to the security of the bloc's allies. Good to have you with us. I'm David Foster. NATO leaders are meeting in Madrid to set the alliance's direction for the future. Russia is top of the agenda after its invasion of Ukraine. But looking beyond Europe, some fear that Russia's foreign policy towards Africa could lead to a new security risk for NATO. Sarah Morris reports.
In May, the Spanish Defence Minister Margarita Robles and British counterpart Ben Wallace warned that Russian state military operations through the security company the Wagner Group pose a very clear threat of terrorism. They've called on NATO to look at Russia's conduct in Africa, with its proximity to Spain causing particular alarm in Madrid.
Obviously, there is a reality in the Ukraine war, but we also have a situation in Africa, which is very worrying from every point of view. From extremism to illegal immigration, that is something that worries Spain a lot.
Wagner has been operating in Mali since December 2021. Violence against civilians has increased since its arrival, resulting in hundreds of deaths. Wagner mercenaries, alongside its claimed the Malian military, are alleged to have committed atrocities, including in March in the town of Mora, where several hundred were killed.
Our witnesses uniformly describe both the foreign soldiers, again, who they said were Russian, as well as the Malian army as engaging in the summary executions of what we believe are up to 300 people.
In Libya, the Wagner Group was brought in to support the rebel general Khalifa Haftar in 2019. According to a military expert, there were some 2,200 Wagner mercenaries in the country. But since the war in Ukraine, Russia has withdrawn 1,300 soldiers. The Central African Republic, although rich in diamond and gold, is one of the poorest countries in the world, with 79% of the population living in poverty. In 2017, President Faustin Archange Touadera brought in the Wagner Group to fight the rebels. There are roughly 1,200 Russian fighters still in the Central African Republic today. This year, Russia has been accused of deadly attacks on mines on the unsecure border between Sudan and the Central African Republic. Dozens of miners have been killed during attacks allegedly involving the Wagner Group, according to the International Crisis Group. A victim of one mine attack, Mohammed Zain Mohammed Wadi, said, "I'll never go back. Actually, I don't think anybody remained. The gold mines there have been taken over by the Russians." Beyond Africa, Russia's military interventions overseas started with its invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. It's been 6 years since Russia launched its first airstrike in Syria, where its intervention was primarily about pushing back against the US dominating the liberal international order. The Kremlin's operations in Syria have preserved the Bashar al-Assad regime, but with devastating consequences for the Syrian people. Africa, with its colonial history, abundant resources and proximity to Europe, gives Russia an easy target to advance its economic and political gains and offset some of the cost of waging war in Ukraine. While the UK and Spain are worried about Russia's geopolitical power in Africa, it remains to be seen whether Russia will be successful in grabbing more and stripping the region of Western influence.
We're off to Benin in Africa, to Cotonou, to be precise, and Oluwole Ojewale joins us from there, Central Africa analyst at the Institute for Security Studies. Johannesburg, South Africa, we see Pauline Bax, Deputy Programme Director for Africa at the Crisis Group. Moscow, we welcome back Vyacheslav Matuzov, former Russian diplomat. And in Birmingham in the UK, Mark Webber, NATO specialist and Professor of International Politics at the University of Birmingham. Great to have you all on the show. Mark, you're off to work for NATO in Rome as part of your affiliation with the University of Birmingham. But there are no African members of NATO. African countries may be affected. What has this got to do, this idea of Russia in Africa with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization?
The Mediterranean coast along North Africa affects NATO's southern members, Italy and France, and of course Turkey, Greece have interests along the North African coast, and NATO itself has been involved in North Africa, its mission in Libya in 2011. NATO has also provided assistance to the African Union in East Africa and dealing with piracy off the Horn of Africa. So there is a record of NATO involvement in the African continent. It's obviously not as significant as its interest in Eastern Europe. Individual allies equally, I guess most importantly France, have significant military involvement in Africa. It's on the decline currently, which is part of the problem in terms of Russian entree into the continent. But at both the organizational level and the level of individual allies, there is something of a track record of involvement. But the premise of your question is correct. NATO has no African members, is unlikely to have any, but it does have partners. Lastly, the Mediterranean Dialogue, which is an official partnership program of the alliance, does include a number of countries along the North African coast.
So let me turn to you, Wole, if I can, because you're in Benin at the moment. We spoke to you a couple of weeks ago. You were in Senegal. And this is from the Carnegie Europe Institute. Putin's using the cloak of history to design Russia's role in climate-disrupted futures in Ukraine. It's about revising history to justify occupation and war. In Africa, it is about instrumentalizing the traumas of history, colonialism and imperialism to undermine African-European relations. Look, Africa's a continent, not a country, but is that how it's largely seen?
Yes. Africa is a continent, is not a country. But if you look at what Putin is doing in Africa now, there are at least 5 dimensions to what Putin is trying to achieve. And I think it speaks to the broader issues of geostrategic interest. You know, Africa, even though it's a continent, the leaders have allowed themselves to be treated as a country. So you have Japan-African Relations Forum, you have a France-African Relation Forum, Russia-African Relation Forum, China-African Relation Forum, even Turkey-African Relation Forum. So you have all these leaders, 54 of them, relating as though they are just a single entity and speaking on behalf of Africa as a single country, not minding the diversity of political structure, the diversity of typology of democracy on the continent. And then if you now look at what is playing out now, you realize that there's a strategic objective that Putin is trying to achieve in Africa. And the number one thing is because of the geopolitical rivalry and relevance that Putin is looking for now. And then you can see that playing out in countries that the Wagner Group has gone to partner with, the countries that they are also trading with in terms of accessing minerals in those countries. And then the second thing is also the military armament partnership with unstable African countries who possibly do not have the free way of negotiating arms with the United States of America. Every one of them has suddenly found a partner in Russia. You talk about Mali, you talk about Central African Republic, you talk about Nigeria, you talk about Cameroon that just signed a partnership agreement with Russia in the recent time.
Okay, well, look, we'll come to specifics if we can in just a moment, and what NATO's concerns are, and also what the concerns of African countries, if there are any, actually are. But Vyacheslav, I want to come to you. And back in the 1960s, the then General Secretary of the Communist Party, Nikita Khrushchev, is said to have told one of his allies, we're basically selling communism to Africa, but in fact, we have to pay the Africans to buy it. In other words, they had to offer their largesse, their weapons, their machinery, their advisors to these African countries to get them to buy the idea of what the Soviet Union was about. Is the same thing happening today?
No, now it's absolutely different goals because Soviet Union has an ideology. So I agree with you that communist ideas kind of dominating in Soviet foreign policy. And basing on this ideology, Soviet Union helped African countries to achieve their independence in their struggle against colonialism, imperialism, as was a doctrine of Russian of Soviet foreign policy on African continent. Because we know had a privileged relations with many of African countries. If I count all the things, even South Africa, even Kenya, even any country, Congo, all of them were received their independence through struggle, and the Soviet Union helped them. It was not a privilege to bring its ideology.
Okay, I understand that, but Russia now has cooperation treaties with, I think it's something like 37 different African countries. If it's not about ideology, as it was in the 60s and 70s, what is it about now?
And now our policy is different, absolutely. First of all, the nature of Russian Federation different absolutely from Soviet Union. Any ideology prohibited in Russia.
But spell out what it is, why it is advantageous to Russia to have these treaties with African countries now. What is different now compared to the 60s and 70s?
Difference, it is financing, the budgeting of our activity in African continents. Previous years in Soviet Union, all our assistance to African countries was based on Russian budget. And now any activity of Russian Federation, they are based on the opportunity and budget of local countries, African countries, because they invite Russian presence. Not Russia came with the ideology of suggesting them to help. So any military, any economical, any companies of Russia is coming to Africa on the base on commercial interests.
Okay, I'm going to go to Pauline because I want to bring everybody in fairly early on. Pauline, if it's about business and not about ideology, why are we seeing, let's bring up a map, Mali, Libya, Mozambique, Central African Republic, Sudan, close to the CAR, Madagascar. Why are we seeing all of these with Russian military advisors in it if it's about business?
Well, Russia positions itself as a provider of security. And so we've seen a lot of military cooperation agreements, as well as the deployment of Wagner troops. Security is a good selling point. Russia doesn't have a colonial history in Africa, and it can offer arms without supposedly interfering in the politics. And it has become quite strong in countries that are unstable, that need military help, that sometimes need political help, and sometimes also autocratic governments, as you see in the case of Central African Republic, for example, which has become fairly authoritarian. We see the military leadership in Mali, which is also a call on Russia now to help. Madagascar is a slightly different case, but especially Central African Republic has been a very good test case or a laboratory for how Russia can expand its influence in a country and maybe in other countries on the continent.
So is it, Pauline, perhaps about supporting totalitarian regimes which are unstable, and in doing so perhaps propping up areas where unrest will be encouraged, which is something that NATO would not want to, or the West would not want to see?
It differs a bit from country to country. I think initially there was no coherent strategy for Russia to expand in Africa. It has seen what it can do in Central African Republic. It was a very successful, as I said, a laboratory for Russia to come in as a security provider and then become politically influential as well. Russia, by the way, does not provide any humanitarian assistance or doesn't do any economic development initiatives. It's now trying to roll out the same sort of strategy in Mali, which is, like Central African Republic, also a former French colony, with a lot of anti-French sentiment among the population. So while it is sort of edging out France, it's also becoming an important security force. And if that is successful, it can probably also start to influence politics as well. And again, this is maybe not a fully thought out expansion strategy, but it's worked well in CAR. It's working well in Mali, as we can see. Libya is a slightly different dynamic, but it's become very important there as well. And it has long-standing ties with Sudan. And if we look at the map of Africa, we see Sudan in the east and then Central African Republic in the middle. And if Russia managed to expand its presence a little bit to the west, it has a nice swathe across Africa throughout. And that would be quite important for them, not only in terms of power play and geopolitical presence, but maybe you can see how it can go from there.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that if we may, Pauline, and we'll bring the map up and show where there's influence at the moment, and we'll ask you in a few minutes where next, possibly. I want to come to you, Mark. 'Twas ever thus, though, wasn't it? I mean, in the 50s, Russian Soviet influence, Egypt with President Nasser, then Tunisia, Morocco, Ghana, Ethiopia, moving south, South Africa supporting the African National Congress. Then we also had Angola, the war in Angola, which the Soviet Union supported. What's different now?
That's a very, very good question. I think there is one very important thing that is different. The countries you referred to were the consequence of a Soviet strategy of trying to establish client states. And not just in Africa, this was also true in East Asia and to some degree Latin America. And this was premised on something that was talked about earlier, an ideological impulse, and also a sense that the Soviet Union was a global power. Russia is not a global power, and it doesn't have the ideological impulse to establish client regimes based on an ideology. So the strategy, insofar as there is one, is very different. It's opportunistic. Russia will seek advantage where it's possible. It is mischievous. I think it's malign. It's premised on an inflated sense of great power status, which is almost a projection of Putinism. This, to me, has no obvious strategic endpoint, which is to undermine Western influence, other than through a series of opportunistic moves where the Putin regime feels an immediate advantage can be had.
In which case, let me put those suggestions of yours to Vyacheslav. Mischievous, malign, no objectives other than, if you like, expanding the ego of the Russian leader. What do you make of those suggestions?
Well, I don't think that Russia is seeking a leading role in Africa or in any other countries. Look, for example, in events in Libya, beginning from 2011, when Nato destroyed an independent African country, rich, and what was considered it is dictatorship. That Gaddafi is not.
But in any way mischievous, in any way malign, in any way just an extension of one man's ego. All of this.
Well, all democratic principles are reading from different ways. Maybe in London, in Paris, they are reading what means on democracy. African country may consider it different way, because different social conditions, different history of country. Why should follow suit of the United States democracy? I don't think that Russia will agree with this principle, and it constructs its relations with African countries according to the demands of African countries.
Okay, so it all depends where you're looking at it from. I totally get that. We've talked, Oluwole, about the Wagner Group being in a number of different African countries, accused of various things.
Who's paying the Wagner Group? Not Russia.
Well,
African countries.
But the Wagner Group is an extension of the Russian government to some extent. It's supported, it's sponsored. Well, you may think it's entirely independent. Once again, a different view from a different country. Wally, let me come to you. This is from an ex-commander of the Wagner Group, a man called Marat Gabidulin.
Wagner, it's kind of a small army. That's its main purpose. And depending on the situation in the area where the units are working, they can be sent elsewhere to solve other problems. For the weapons we use to fall into the hands of people like us, it can only be done with the permission of the state authorities, no less.
So, Wally, that man is saying the Wagner Group, the troops, can be sent anywhere to solve problems, and then goes on to say, but we have to be invited in. Invited in with what kind of motives would you think?
Well, I think the Wagner Group presence, at least in Africa, is informed by cronyism, because it's largely tied to Putin as allies of Putin who have established military businesses and as a contracting agency in Africa. So, and then there is no altruism. If you look at the records in countries where Wagner Group is present in the recent time, it's either they are subverting human rights or they are engaging in illicit businesses, particularly with respect to mineral trading in Sudan, in Central African Republic, where they are negotiating mineral resources as exchange for armament in those countries. So there's no any altruism that can be found. Rather, they are undermining democracies, particularly in some of these countries that I've mentioned. Yeah. And as you call,
and one can speculate on the reasons for that, which we have done in other programs. Pauline, let me come to you. I said, think about other countries that may come under Russian influence in the near future. We'll pull up a map. You may care to throw a few different names out there. And my question to you is, what next? What if NATO, i.e. the West in this case, is worried about it? What can it do?
Well, Wagner has offered its services to Burkina Faso, which is next to Mali. Burkina Faso has declined its services so far. The army says it can manage its own security. That is what we know. So Sudan might see some expansion there. I would like to note that the presence of Wagner should also not be overestimated. Central African Republic is about 1,000 men, which is not huge. Mali is the same. Wagner failed miserably in Mozambique, where it stayed for 2 or 3 months and after some serious losses had to withdraw, or decided to withdraw rather. But yes, I think we should be looking at the Sahel region, where there's massive insecurity, jihadist insurgencies that continue to expand, and some governments that feel cornered, if not overrun, by these insurgencies, and may at some point decide to ask for help from Russia or from Wagner.
Mark, let me come to you. As I mentioned at the beginning, you're about to become a member of the faculty of the NATO College. That is in Rome. You'll be giving them your advice. And what I'm wondering is whether one of the things you might say is that this is a distraction. Russia is simply trying to draw attention away from the problems it's posed for the West, i.e. NATO, in the Ukraine and Baltic states, etc., etc. Do not take your eye off the ball by thinking Africa is that important when it comes to Western defense.
Well, I would agree. I mean, clearly, the malign influence of the Wagner Group is very important for the African population, but I don't think it's terribly important for the main business of European defense, which is dealing with the Russia-Ukrainian war and the intimidation which Russia is exacting upon countries such as Poland and the Baltic states, all of which is going on in plain sight. The affairs of the Wagner Group in Africa, at least, are behind the camouflage of deniability, which you've just been discussing. But the threat in Eastern Europe and Ukraine is absolutely clear and obvious. And it is entirely right, therefore, that over the next 3 days, I think the business of the Madrid summit will try and reinforce deterrence and defense. There's a whole other story as to how far NATO should go in assisting the Ukrainian military.
And indeed the Baltic states. I'm going to have to stop you at this particular point. Do come back when we have a program about that, which will be very, very soon indeed. Vyacheslav, thank you for your point of view, suggesting that, in fact, Russia's merely trying to help out African countries. Oluwole for expressing concerns, as you see them, from within Africa itself. And Pauline, we appreciate your time on this program too, looking at it from the perspective of the crisis group. Great to have you all on the program, informative and not argumentative. I love it. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, wherever you happen to be watching this particular edition of Roundtable. I'm David Foster, but it was a team that made it possible, and I'd like to thank them too. Good to have your company. See you next time. Till then, goodbye.